SpongeBob SquarePants is, at its core, a show about the mundane. While the premises of most cartoon shows revolve around big concepts like magic powers, aliens, or grand adventures, SpongeBob excels at telling deep stories using the most simple of situations. One example of the show taking a mundane premise and turning it into a suspenseful and hilarious 11 minutes of television is the episode Wet Painters, an episode that revolves around SpongeBob and Patrick being tasked with painting the interior of Mr. Krabs' house. To someone unfamiliar, an episode about two guys painting a wall doesn't sound like a compelling story. After all, such a task is so famously boring that we have a whole saying associated with it: watching paint dry. But watching Wet Painters is nothing like watching paint dry. In just a few minutes, its narrative grips you and takes you along on a suspenseful and hilarious journey with the characters. How did the writers accomplish this? Well, like all great works of art, Wet Painters is an amalgamation of many different storytelling choices that all work together to elicit an understanding of the character's emotional journey. Also, the jokes are really funny. The foundation of the episode are its stakes, which are set clearly and menacingly by Mr. Krabs as he gives SpongeBob and Patrick their interior design assignment. If they get so much as a drop of paint on any of Krabs' many knickknacks, he is going to cut their butts off. Now, if you've seen lots of my content before, which if you haven't, you totally should, hit that subscribe button, you would probably think that I'm a prudish hater of all sorts of raunchy humor, because I have been known to criticize it a lot. However, I only dislike raunchy humor when it doesn't serve the story. When something a little more dirty serves the story well, it can often strike a beautiful balance, and that's exactly what Mr. Krabs' threat does. The fear of losing their butts is taken so seriously despite how absurd it is that even though you're laughing, you almost feel scared for these guys, especially because of the sheer number of objects inside the house they need to avoid. It has a way of making you think, man, I couldn't even do this, these bozos definitely can't. The threat to sever butts is also effective because it cartoonishly removes the situation from reality, thus elevating the stakes of the situation without having to create a realistic outcome. If Mr. Krabs had instead, say, threatened to murder SpongeBob and Patrick should they fail the task, sure, we'd still be scared, but we'd almost be too scared, and their actions would be less funny because they'd be acting this way out of fear of dying, which we see as sad and scary, as opposed to them being afraid of getting their butts cut off. While that would be horrifying in real life as well, is so cartoonishly ridiculous that we don't have to feel as bad for laughing at them being afraid of it. On the flip side, the butt threat allows the story to have higher stakes than a non-violent threat. Like if the consequence was, say, SpongeBob would get fired from the Krusty Krab if he failed, while those would be high stakes, they wouldn't be high enough to warrant this sense of finality that we feel as we sit in suspense watching the paint inch closer and closer to the knickknacks. The stakes work because they are heavy consequences that are extremely hard to avoid. This combination makes for a suspenseful story. Funnily enough, many great crime dramas make you feel the same way. Like, I know it sounds silly, but Breaking Bad Season 4, where the protagonist is on the brink of getting murdered for the entire season, elicits the same feeling of fear out of me that Wet Painters does. But while a show like Breaking Bad uses these sorts of stakes to make me feel more anxious for the characters, SpongeBob uses it to make us laugh harder. Another thing that Wet Painters accomplishes masterfully is using cartoon logic to its absolute fullest. While we often think that in cartoon world anything is possible, cartoon logic is actually a really difficult line to toe on the part of the creators. Even in a world as silly as SpongeBob, the universe does need to operate with a level of consistency that makes sure the audience doesn't fully question anything that happens. Like Patrick pulling out this axe, for example. Obviously, it makes no logical sense for Patrick to be carrying this axe in his pants, but the reason we as the audience accept that he got it from practically nowhere is because it serves the story by showing us in an exaggerated way that Patrick is irresponsible. Plenty of other moments happen in Wet Painters that defy the laws of physics, and every time they happen, they do so in a way that serves the story well enough that the audience can believe it to be true. Most of the physics-defying cartoon moments have to do with the paint itself. Sometimes the paint feels almost like it's alive and is enjoying making SpongeBob and Patrick nervous. When SpongeBob first opens the can, a drop of paint pops out and jumps all across the little tarps they put out, and then flies right back into the can it came from. Even Patrick is disappointed. Then, when SpongeBob dabs the first paint stroke, it starts to drift downward, making SpongeBob blow it out of the way until he creates a giant paint bubble. Then, Patrick gets another object out of nowhere that, similar to the aforementioned X, we can accept exists because it serves the story. Then comes what I think is the most interesting creative choice of the episode. When the bubble bursts, it perfectly paints every inch of the wall without getting on anything. Well, almost anything. So like I said earlier, watching two guys paint a wall would make for a boring episode because any story that is about doing a thing isn't about actually doing that thing. Every story is really about a character having their flaws challenged and learning a lesson. Having SpongeBob and Patrick actually do any painting isn't required for this to be a meaningful story. In fact, the more painting they did, the less time we would have for the actual story. So the writers used this moment of magical realism to skip the entire painting process. And they chose the moment that we as the audience would most expect everything to go wrong. I also want to take a moment to praise the art direction for how much of a tone shift we feel after the paint bubble bursts. The change from the dark brown to the full white and the inside of Krabs' house gives us this sense of tranquility. Like, everything is gonna be okay. And just as we start to feel our heroes are safe, SpongeBob spots paint on Mr. Krabs' first dollar. Not just any regular one of his possessions, but his most treasured possession of all, cheapskate that he is. Turns out the paint wasn't on their side after all. Now, it's ambiguous as to whether or not SpongeBob and Patrick would have been able to get away with the tiny dot of paint that got on the dollar, because SpongeBob makes it worse by trying to make it better, which leads me to the heart of the story, SpongeBob's character flaw being challenged. So at first glance, you might think that the character flaw that Wet Painters examines is Patrick being irresponsible, but that actually isn't the case. While Patrick is certainly irresponsible throughout the episode and does put the entire operation in danger many times, his character flaw is never challenged, and he goes through no arc throughout the episode. And that's okay, because this episode is not a Patrick episode, it's a SpongeBob episode. SpongeBob goes through a character arc where his own character flaw of perfectionism and paranoia are challenged. Throughout the episode, all of the things that go wrong are not because of Patrick being a doofus, they are because SpongeBob is too nervous and neurotic. Think about it. It's SpongeBob who knocks out the first drop of paint because he insists on opening Patrick's can. It's SpongeBob who makes the first paint bubble because he nervously tries to blow away the first paint drop. When Patrick blows the second paint bubble, he does so because SpongeBob asks what could be worse than a giant paint bubble. And when Patrick adds more air to the double giant paint bubble and makes it explode, he only does so because SpongeBob asks, "I don't think this bubble can get any bigger." See? SpongeBob's fault. Okay, maybe those two things might be a little bit Patrick's fault. But I think it's interesting that the writers had Patrick behave this way only after misunderstanding SpongeBob, putting just a little bit of the culpability on SpongeBob's neuroticism. And of course, most importantly, the very reason that Mr. Krabs' dollar gets covered in paint is because SpongeBob tries to wipe it off. This is the biggest screw up in the entire episode, and Patrick has nothing to do with it. If this were a more standard cartoon episode, it would probably have revolved around Patrick screwing up and SpongeBob and him having a fight over it, and then they make up at the end of the episode. Now, that's not a bad formula for a cartoon episode. Plenty of episodes do pit SpongeBob and Patrick against each other, like Naughty Nautical Neighbors or New Student Starfish, but Wet Painters does not have SpongeBob and Patrick have conflict with each other at all. And I think that is a very important and also very difficult choice on the part of the writers. There are so many moments in this episode where SpongeBob could have been like, "Patrick, how could you?" And then the whole episode would just be about that now, but they restrained. Sure, there's a few moments where SpongeBob is like, "No, Patrick, cut that out," but those moments never derail the story. For the most part, SpongeBob and Patrick are in this together, and that allows the narrative to focus more on SpongeBob's character arc, with Patrick's purpose in the story to be more so a stressor to SpongeBob that brings out the worst of his carefulness with his contrasting irresponsibleness. That's a hard word to say. With his contrasting irresponsibleness. Yeah, I got it right. Then Mr. Krabs returns, and the sequence between Krabs returning and him finding the ruined dollar is just perfect. With all the moments where he goes, "What's this?" only for it to be something different. "You messed up my dollar-rama" is just an absolutely brilliant joke. They were really cooking with that one. After SpongeBob and Patrick are caught, Krabs reveals that the paint comes off with saliva, meaning that Sponge and Pat were never in any danger at all. So even though they failed, they get to keep their butts. Now, maybe you might see this as an unsatisfying ending. After all, they did fail. They should lose their butts. Why do they get to get out of it? But this being the ending does help teach the lesson that SpongeBob needed to learn. That even if the stakes seem high, you shouldn't let your nerves get one over you. Especially because authority figures often exaggerate the consequences of failure just to keep you in line. Or in Krabs' case, he just likes to mess with them. SpongeBob even assumes that the reason Krabs lied to them was to teach them a lesson before it's revealed that he was just doing a little trolling. While it's not explicitly stated, I kind of feel like SpongeBob SpongeBob's indignant exit from the crab's residence is him completing his character arc and overcoming his character flaw of neuroticism. And, as poetic justice, Krabs doesn't even get to keep his nice new painted walls because he ruins all the paint by laughing too hard at his misdeeds. Almost like that one was a lesson to parents to not lie to their kids. So that's why Wet Painters is a compelling story. It mostly lies in just how well the stakes are set. From the very moment Krabs makes his threat to the moment we learned his threat was empty, we are taken on a journey where with each thing that goes wrong, the suspense rises and rises and the laughs get bigger and bigger, which makes this a truly iconic piece of television history. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, I've got a Patreon and you can become a channel member. Also, make sure to check out my gaming channel. I just did a video where I compared the SpongeBob movie GBA game to the actual movie. There are some shocking things in there. You should really check it out.